The galaxy is full of voices. Voices of trade. Voices of war. Voices of stories and myths that pass from one world to another, carried by travelers who never stop moving between stars. Every species has a history, every empire has a pride, and every culture has a tale it wants the galaxy to remember. But among these voices, there is one whisper that moves differently. It is never spoken loudly. It is never sung in public songs or declared in great halls. It is carried quietly, like a shadow behind words. A whisper that begins with the same sentence everywhere. When the galaxy spoke of humans. And then silence. No one dares to finish it. It does not matter if you are sitting in a shining city of the Eldar, or the mining colonies of the Trith, or deep inside the frozen halls of the Zoran clans. If you ask an elder about humans, they fall silent. Their eyes shift. Their voice drops. The conversation dies. The words never continue. The galaxy remembers humans. And the galaxy fears the memory. The historian named Kale had traveled many systems, and he had studied many forgotten species. He was not a soldier. He was not a conqueror. He was a seeker of truth. He had spent decades collecting fragments of history that most people ignored. Ruins, broken records, incomplete carvings, these were his treasure. But even Kale knew there was something strange about the humans. He had heard the whisper since he was a child. He had seen elders fall silent when the name was spoken. He had even seen priests perform a small ritual, as if the very sound of human was dangerous, as if saying the word too much would invite something terrible. Kale did not believe in fear. He believed in knowledge. So when his studies reached the subject of humans, he did not stop, like others did. He leaned closer. He wanted to know. He began asking questions in markets and stations. Who were the humans? He asked a trader on the planet Eryx. The trader laughed nervously. Best you not ask, historian. Some names are better left in silence. On the frozen moon of Taris, he asked a soldier. Why do people stop speaking when they mention humans? The soldier looked at him for a long moment, then simply said, because silence is safer than memory. No matter where Kale traveled, the answer was the same. Fear, silence, avoidance. And always the same unfinished sentence, when the galaxy spoke of humans. But Kale's curiosity was stronger than fear. He could not leave the question unanswered. He had to know what came after the silence. He found his first clue in an abandoned library orbiting a dead star. The library belonged to the Valeri, an ancient race who had disappeared centuries ago. Most of the records were destroyed, their data cores burned by time. But in the deepest vault, Kale found a shard of text still glowing with faint energy. The fragment read, "The humans came like fire. Their numbers were small, but their will was endless. Entire fleets bent and broke, not under their weapons, but under their defiance. When the galaxy spoke of humans, it remembered." And the text ended there. The rest of the shard was corrupted, erased by something long ago. Kale felt a chill. For the first time, he had found more than a whisper. He had found a voice, and that voice spoke of fire and will. What kind of species could burn themselves into memory so deeply that even centuries later, entire civilizations refused to speak their name? The historian could not stop. He followed the trail. On the gas world of Myrr, he found a mural carved in stone, showing alien warriors bowing before shadowy figures that looked like no other species. They were not tall. They were not strong. But their eyes were carved with strange intensity. Under the mural was written a phrase in broken runes. The fragile ones who would not break. On the desert planet Koroth, in the ruins of a fallen temple, he found chants scratched on walls. When the galaxy spoke of humans, the stars themselves listened. And then the words stopped. Always stopping. Always unfinished. Kale began to realize something. It was not just that aliens refused to finish the sentence. It was as if the galaxy itself refused. Something silenced the words, something beyond fear, almost like a curse. One night, while resting on a lonely station at the edge of a nebula, Kale overheard a group of old miners drinking together. Their voices were rough, but when one of them mentioned humans, the room grew cold. "They don't talk about it," one miner whispered. "But my grandfather told me the truth. He said he saw humans fight once, long ago." The others leaned closer, their faces pale. "What did he see?" Kale asked, his voice calm, though his heart pounded. The miner looked at him with suspicion, then answered slowly. "He saw them stand against the Vayari. You know the Vayari, the swarm that eats entire planets. No one could stop them. No one. But the humans, they did not run. They did not hide. My grandfather said they stood on the surface of a burning world, holding nothing but metal in their hands, and they fought until the swarm fled. He said the Vayari never attacked again. Not because they were destroyed, but because they were afraid." The miner's voice dropped lower. "My grandfather said, the humans smiled when they fought. That's why no one dares finish the sentence. Because no one wants to remember that smile." The room fell silent. No one spoke again. Kale could not sleep that night. He stared out of the window, watching the nebula shift and glow. The image of fragile beings standing on a burning world filled his mind. Who were these creatures, so small yet so unbroken? What happened to them? Why were they gone now? He remembered the trader's words, "Some names are better left in silence." But Kale could not leave it. The silence was more dangerous than the truth. The more he searched, the more the galaxy resisted him. In some places, doors were closed to him. Records were destroyed before he could reach them. Entire archives had been sealed with warnings that glowed red, forbidden. Do not open. Do not awaken the past. But Kale was not afraid. He was determined. He told himself, if humans were only a myth, why is the galaxy still afraid? That was the question that drove him forward. And that was the question that would not let him rest. He began to notice something strange. Every time he spoke the word human, machines flickered. Lights dimmed. Once, in the deep core of a research station, the AI itself froze when Kale whispered the word. Its voice glitched, then said in a tone of fear, "Do not say that name." Machines did not feel fear. And yet, the AI refused to hear the name again. What kind of memory could live not only in minds, but in systems, in data, in the very fabric of the galaxy itself? One evening, Kale stood alone in the ruins of an old battlefield on a forgotten moon. The ground was scarred with craters. The sky was silent. Pieces of broken ships lay half buried in the dust. And on one broken wall, half erased by time, he saw the beginning of the sentence carved again. When the galaxy spoke of humans. And then the carving stopped. Kale reached out, his fingers brushing the letters. He whispered the words to himself, completing them in his own way. What did it remember? The wind answered with silence. Kale knew his journey was only beginning. The galaxy carried a secret it feared, a secret it refused to speak. And that secret was called human. And so, Kale made a vow. He would keep searching. He would keep following the whispers. He would break the silence. Because somewhere, hidden in the void, was the truth. And the truth was waiting to be found. Kale's search did not end with whispers. Whispers had carried him far, but whispers could not answer the questions that burned inside his mind. He wanted proof. He wanted to see with his own eyes what the galaxy refused to say aloud. And so his path led him into the ruins of war, into the places where silence was born. The first step of this journey began on the shattered moon of Relas. The moon was nothing more than broken rock now, cracked open by weapons that had struck it long ago. No life remained there. No cities. No voices. Only dust and scars that stretched across the surface like wounds that never healed. Kale's ship touched down on the edge of a crater that was larger than mountains. He stepped out into the silence and looked across the endless hole. It was not made by nature. It was made by war. At first, Kale found nothing. The ground was empty. The air was still. But in the far distance, half buried in stone, he found the remains of a structure. It had once been a fortress, though time and battle had broken it apart. Inside, he discovered something strange. The walls still carried faint lines of energy, glowing very weakly, like the last breath of a dying star. He followed the glow and entered a chamber deep within. There he found them, records. Not ordinary records, but battle archives, hidden within crystal cores. They were old, perhaps thousands of years old, but still alive with data. Kale touched one, and the chamber filled with sound. He heard screams. The sound of ships burning. The clash of weapons. The roar of fire. And then he heard another sound, one that made his heart stop. Voices. Human voices. They were not calm. They were not soft. They were shouts of war. He did not understand every word, but he understood the meaning. It was the sound of a species refusing to surrender. The archive showed broken images, soldiers standing against machines, small figures holding the line against larger enemies. They were fragile, yes. Their bodies were not armored by nature. Their hands did not carry claws or scales. But in their eyes, Kale saw something terrifying. He saw a fire that refused to die. The enemies they fought were many. Some were machines, cold and vast. Others were alien legions with ships that filled the sky. But every time the humans fought. Even when they fell, they fought. Even when their cities burned, they fought. Kale felt his breath catch in his throat. He had studied many wars in his life. He had seen bravery in many forms. But this was something different. The humans fought not because they believed they would win, but because they believed they could not stop. It was not victory that drove them. It was will. The archive ended with a final line of text. When the galaxy spoke of humans, it remembered defiance. The words burned themselves into Kale's mind. Defiance. That was the word the galaxy feared. That was why silence surrounded their name. But the moon of Relas was only the beginning. Kale's journey took him next to the ruins of the Nalari citadel. This was a place avoided by travelers, for the citadel was said to be cursed. Long ago, it had been the center of an empire. Now it was nothing but broken walls under a black sky. Kale walked through the ruins with quiet steps, feeling the weight of history pressing against him. Deep within the citadel, he found a chamber sealed by energy locks. They resisted his tools, but Kale was patient. After many hours, the door gave way, and inside he found another archive, larger than the first. This one was not sound. It was vision. Holograms came to life around him, showing battles across the stars. Kale stood in the center as images swirled. He saw alien fleets unleashing fire upon human worlds. He saw cities falling, skies turning red. And in the center of the storm, he saw humans rise again and again. One battle burned itself into his mind. A single human fleet, small and weak compared to the enemy, faced a swarm that stretched across the sky. By all reason, the humans should have fled. By all reason, they should have surrendered. But instead, they advanced. Their ships tore into the swarm with reckless speed, burning even as they fired. The swarm consumed them, but not before hundreds of enemy ships fell. And then Kale saw the faces of the humans. The holograms showed their commanders giving orders. They were not smiling, as some stories claimed. They were not laughing. They were calm, steady, focused. There was no fear in their eyes. There was only one truth written on their faces: we will not stop. The battle ended with silence. The human fleet was gone, destroyed. But the swarm retreated. They left the system. They never returned. Kale understood then what no one dared to say. Humans did not always win. But their enemies always remembered them. Because fighting humans was never victory. It was always a wound. The archive flickered and dimmed. The last image froze in front of him, a single human ship burning in space, surrounded by enemies, yet still firing until the last breath. And beneath the image, more words appeared. When the galaxy spoke of humans, it remembered war without surrender. Kale left the citadel shaken. The silence of the galaxy was beginning to make sense. It was not just fear of humans. It was fear of memory. Every record he found told the same story. Humans were fragile, but they fought with something greater than strength. They fought with will that refused to bend. And that will had scarred the galaxy so deeply that even centuries later, no one dared speak it aloud. But Kale wanted more. He wanted the full truth. So he traveled again. His path led him to the archives of the Varric Collective, hidden deep inside an asteroid field. The collective was known for recording every detail of war. Their records stretched back millions of years. If there was any place that still held the full story of humans, it would be here. Kale bribed, bargained, and begged until the guardians of the archives allowed him entry. Inside, he found halls filled with endless light. Records stretched higher than he could see, each one glowing with history. He searched for days, guided only by fragments. And then he found it. A record sealed with warning marks, glowing with danger. The guardians tried to stop him, but Kale would not listen. He had come too far. He touched the seal, and the archive opened. The visions that came forth were darker than any he had seen before. These were not battles of courage. These were battles of horror. He saw entire worlds burning under alien fire, and humans standing in the ashes, refusing to fall. He saw them fight even when their bodies broke. He saw them rise again even when death was certain. And he saw their enemies break, not because they were defeated, but because they could not understand how to fight something that did not surrender. One vision showed a human city under siege. The enemy had destroyed everything: food, water, defenses. Yet the humans fought in the streets with nothing but broken tools and fire from their own ruins. And somehow, they held. Another vision showed a fleet of human ships trapped in a dying star system. The enemy closed in, confident of victory. But the humans turned their ships toward the star, dragging the enemy with them. Both sides burned, but the enemy never returned to that system again. And then came the final vision. A council of alien leaders gathered after the wars, their voices heavy with fear. One spoke the forbidden words aloud. When the galaxy spoke of humans, it remembered the day death learned fear. Kale's breath caught. Death itself had feared them? What kind of species could make death hesitate? The record ended there, sealed again by the collective. Kale stood in silence, his mind burning with questions. He knew now why the galaxy refused to finish the sentence. The truth was too heavy. The truth was too dangerous. When Kale left the archives, he carried more than records. He carried a weight. The galaxy had buried the memory of humans under silence because it could not face what it had seen. Humans had shown the galaxy something it did not want to remember. That strength was not in numbers, nor in power, nor in weapons. Strength was in will. And that will could never be broken. Kale looked to the stars and wondered. If humans had once filled the galaxy with such fire, where were they now? Were they truly gone, or had they only disappeared into silence, waiting for the right moment to return? The historian knew his search was far from over. He had seen the shadows of war, but he had not yet touched the full truth. There were still survivors, perhaps. There were still voices that had seen the humans with their own eyes. And Kale would find them. For the silence was no longer enough. The galaxy might fear the memory, but Kale wanted to finish the sentence. And so he traveled onward, deeper into the unknown, following the trail of whispers and war. Because the story of humans was not yet finished, Kale had followed whispers across broken moons, into forbidden archives, and through the ruins of forgotten wars. He had seen the silent records of humans, records that spoke of defiance, of war without surrender, of fire that did not die. Yet all he had found were echoes. Fragments of sound. Shattered visions. Images too distant to touch. He wanted more. He wanted a voice, a living voice, someone who had looked upon humans with their own eyes. And so his path led him to the far edge of the galaxy, where stars grew thin and the dark stretched wider. There, in a station that hung alone above a dying world, Kale found the one who was said to be the oldest survivor of the wars. The station was called Vaynar's Rest, though no one truly rested there. It was a place of shadows, where the air smelled of rust and age. The halls were empty, except for the sound of machines barely alive. The few travelers who passed through avoided the lower decks, where whispers said the survivor lived. Some called him mad. Some called him cursed. All called him dangerous, not because of what he could do, but because of what he had seen. Kale was not afraid. He had carried fear since he first spoke the name of humans aloud, and by now it had become a companion. He walked into the lower decks, his footsteps echoing softly. At last, he entered a chamber lit only by a single lamp. And there, sitting in the half-dark, was the survivor. His body was thin, his skin stretched like parchment, his eyes pale and hollow. He looked more like a shadow than a living being. Yet when he turned his gaze to Kale, the historian felt a weight press against his chest. It was the weight of memory. The survivor spoke slowly, his voice rough with age. He asked Kale why he had come, why he had disturbed the silence. And Kale, with steady words, told him the truth. He wanted to know. He wanted to finish the sentence that no one dared complete. He wanted to hear what the galaxy remembered when it spoke of humans. The survivor laughed softly, a sound like dry stone breaking. He told Kale that truth was a burden, not a gift. That once the words were spoken, they could not be forgotten. But Kale did not turn away. He stood firm, as the humans had once stood firm. And at last, the survivor agreed to speak. He began with a memory of fire. He told Kale that he had been young when he first saw humans. He was a soldier then, part of an army that believed itself unstoppable. His people had joined an alliance of great powers, an alliance built to crush the rising threat of humans. They thought it would be easy. After all, humans were few in number. Their worlds were small. Their bodies were weak. What could such a fragile species do against empires that had ruled for centuries? The survivor remembered the first battle. He remembered his commanders laughing as fleets closed in on human territory. They expected surrender. They expected begging. They expected silence. But the humans did not beg. They did not surrender. The survivor said he would never forget what he saw that day. Human ships, smaller and weaker, moved with a speed and fury that defied reason. They struck like fire, burning even as they fell. And when their ships were destroyed, their soldiers continued the fight on the ground, refusing to yield even when surrounded. The survivor had seen war many times before. He had seen enemies run. He had seen enemies cry. But he had never seen enemies who smiled as they fought. He had never seen enemies who looked at death and treated it as nothing. He said that was the first time fear touched his heart. Not fear of dying, but fear of something deeper. The fear of facing a will that could not be broken. The survivor paused often, his voice trembling as he spoke, but Kale listened carefully to every word. The old soldier continued with another tale, one that burned brighter in his memory. He described a siege upon a human city. The Alliance had brought overwhelming power. They surrounded the planet. They cut off supplies. They bombarded defenses until nothing remained but dust. They believed the humans trapped below would surrender. But the humans did not. When the soldiers of the Alliance landed, they found the streets filled with fighters. Men and women, young and old, standing together. They had no armor. Their weapons were crude, some nothing more than tools of labor turned into blades. Yet they fought with such ferocity that entire legions were forced to retreat. The survivor said he saw a boy, no older than a child, throw himself against armored troops with fire in his hands. He saw women fight with nothing but stones. He saw old men stand as shields for the young. And he saw the impossible, the Alliance losing ground against a people who had nothing left but their will. The siege lasted weeks. In the end, the city fell, but not in silence. It fell in fire, in screams of defiance that echoed even as the last human drew breath. And the survivor confessed that the Alliance commanders, though victorious, did not celebrate. They did not cheer. For they had not won. They had survived. Cale felt his heart race as he listened. He had read records. He had seen fragments of battle. But hearing the story from a living voice carried a weight he could not describe. The survivor's eyes grew distant as he spoke of the next battle, one greater than all the rest. He told Cale of a world at the edge of the galaxy, a world where the humans made their final stand. The Alliance came with everything it had. Fleets that filled the stars, armies that covered the land, weapons that could shatter mountains. They believed this battle would be the end, the moment humans would be erased forever. But the humans did not come to the battle to survive. They came to make the galaxy remember. The survivor said the skies turned red with fire as human ships tore into the enemy. They did not retreat, even when surrounded. They did not yield, even when burning. On the ground, soldiers fought in streets already reduced to rubble. They fought until their bodies could no longer rise. And in the final moment, when defeat was certain, they unleashed something the survivor had never seen before. Not a weapon, not a machine, but themselves. They fought with such fury, such will, that the enemy broke. The Alliance, for all its numbers and power, could not understand it. Armies faltered. Fleets hesitated. And for the first time, the survivor saw his people retreat. Not because they were defeated, but because they could not face the humans any longer. The survivor's voice grew soft as he described the end. The humans were gone. Their cities were ash. Their fleets were dust. But their memory lived. The survivor said he had carried that memory all his life, a memory that haunted his dreams. When the galaxy spoke of humans, the survivor whispered, his voice like the last echo of a dying star. It remembered that they looked at death and they laughed. It remembered that they stood when no one else would. It remembered that they were fragile, but they never broke. Cale felt the words burn into him like fire. He knew then why the galaxy was silent. It was not simply fear of humans. It was fear of remembering what they had done. It was fear of remembering that there had once been a species who refused to bow to death itself. The survivor leaned back in his chair, his strength fading. He told Cale that the truth was a curse. To know it was to carry the same weight he carried. But Cale did not regret hearing it. He had wanted the truth, and now he had it. As Cale left the chamber, the survivor's final words followed him. Words that would not leave his mind. The galaxy does not speak of humans because it fears their return. And if they ever return, Cale, the silence will end, and the stars themselves will tremble. Cale walked through the empty halls of the station, his thoughts heavy. He had come seeking answers, and he had found them. He had found the truth that no one dared to say. Humans were not remembered for power or for victory. They were remembered for defiance. They were remembered for standing against the impossible. They were remembered for laughing in the face of death. And now Cale carried that memory forward. He knew the silence could not last forever. The galaxy could try to bury the past, but truth had a way of rising. As his ship left the station and drifted into the void, Cale looked out at the stars. Somewhere, beyond the silence, beyond the whispers, beyond the fear, was the rest of the story. And he would find it. Because when the galaxy spoke of humans, the sentence was never finished. And Cale was determined to finish it. Cale left the station with the survivor's words carved deep into his mind. He had heard stories before. He had seen fragments of history. He had studied whispers of battles long buried. But nothing compared to hearing it spoken by a living voice, one who had stood in the fire and survived. The survivor's memory was not a tale shaped by poets or carved into stone by priests. It was raw, sharp, alive. It carried the weight of truth. And with that truth came new questions. Why had the galaxy hidden this story? Why had entire civilizations chosen silence instead of memory? Why did every voice fall quiet when the word human was spoken? Cale was no longer searching for humans alone. He was searching for silence itself. He wanted to know why silence had become the only shield strong enough to protect the galaxy from its own memory. The answer, he believed, lay deeper than ruins and archives. It lay in the secret councils of empires, in the records forbidden even to kings, in the hearts of those who feared not only the past but the future. Kale traveled to the core worlds, where power still lived in towers of light and stone. He sought the hidden archives of the Eldari, the race who had once called themselves the teachers of the galaxy. They were old, proud, and careful with their secrets. He disguised his arrival, for the Eldari did not welcome historians who dug too deep. Their cities shone like jewels, but beneath that beauty were chains of silence. It took weeks of patient searching, quiet words, and secret bargains before Kale found a door that would open. The Eldari High archives were vast, but most of what they showed was harmless. It was history polished and shaped to make their empire shine. Yet in the lowest vaults, Kale discovered something hidden behind seals of law. A chamber that no one was supposed to enter. Inside were records not of victory, but of fear. The Eldari had kept their silence not because they lacked memory, but because memory was too dangerous to speak. The records showed transcripts of councils held during the human wars. The voices of Eldari leaders filled the chamber, their words heavy with unease. They spoke of humans as if they were not a people, but a storm. They argued over what humans meant for the future. Some claimed that humans were simply mad, that their defiance was a sickness. Others said they were more than that they carried within them something greater, something the galaxy could not measure. One voice stood apart from the rest. An elder who warned that humans were not only dangerous in war but dangerous in peace. For when the galaxy spoke of humans, the elder said, it saw its own weakness. Kale felt his breath tighten as he read those words. The silence was not born only from fear of humans. It was born from fear of reflection. Humans had shown the galaxy something it did not want to see. That power was not in wealth, or in numbers, or in long histories. Power was in the refusal to break. And if other species remembered that, if they learned from it, then empires built on control would fall. The silence was a shield to protect not against humans themselves, but against their idea. Kale left the Eldari archives with his thoughts burning. He understood now that silence was not only history buried but history forbidden. The galaxy did not want the truth of humans to spread. It did not want people to remember what it meant to stand without fear. But Kale also knew this was not the whole story. There was something more. The survivor had hinted at it with his final words, that the galaxy feared the return of humans. Not just their memory, but their presence. So Kale searched again, this time not for records, but for signs. Signs that perhaps humans were not as gone as the galaxy claimed. His journey took him to the ruins of the Varan Spire, once the greatest communications hub of the Outer Rim. Now it was abandoned, its towers broken, its machines silent. But Kale believed secrets still lived within its ruins. The spire was dangerous. Storms of radiation swept across the surface. Machines half alive roamed the halls, attacking anything that moved. Yet Kale pressed on, his steps guided by determination. He descended into the deepest levels, where the oldest machines still hummed faintly with energy. There, in a chamber of broken screens, he discovered a signal. It was faint, old, almost erased. But when Kale played it, his heart stopped. It was a human voice. The words were broken, carried through centuries of static, but the meaning was clear. The voice spoke of survival. It spoke of endurance. It promised that even if the world burned, humanity would remain. Kale listened again and again, his chest heavy with wonder. The galaxy claimed humans were gone. The silence claimed they had been erased. Yet here was proof that they had left their voices behind, voices strong enough to travel through centuries. He realized then that silence was also fear of hope. For if humans had truly been erased, there would be no reason to hide their story. But if even a fragment of them remained, then silence was the only way to keep the galaxy calm. Kale carried the signal with him as he left the spire. He knew now that the silence was not only about the past. It was about the future. The galaxy feared not only what humans had done, but what they might still do. The more Kale uncovered, the more he felt the silence push back. In stations, he noticed eyes watching him. In markets, strangers turned away when his name was spoken. Once, in the shadows of a docking bay, he found a message painted on the wall: "Leave the silence alone." But Kale did not stop. He could not. His final journey in this part of his search brought him to the world of Drosen, a barren planet scarred by ancient war. There, hidden under rock and sand, he found what he had been searching for, a council chamber preserved in stone, untouched for centuries. Inside were carvings of alien leaders, their faces frozen in fear. And across the chamber, carved in larger letters than any others, were words that shook Kale to his core. When the galaxy spoke of humans, it remembered silence. Because silence was safer than truth. Silence was safer than hope. Silence was safer than fear. Kale stood in the chamber for a long time, reading the words again and again. He finally understood. The silence was not weakness. It was a choice. A choice made by empires, by survivors, by the galaxy itself. A choice to bury humans so deep that they would never rise again. But choices could be broken. Silence could be broken. Kale left Drosen with a fire in his heart. He knew now that the galaxy stayed silent not because it had forgotten, but because it remembered too well. It remembered humans in every shadow of history, in every scar of war, in every whisper that still lived in dark corners. It remembered the defiance that would not die. And Kale also knew that silence could not last forever. For the more he searched, the more he found. Whispers, signals, fragments of truth, they were everywhere, waiting to be uncovered. He looked out at the stars as his ship rose once more into the void. Somewhere out there, the truth was still alive. Somewhere out there, the silence would finally end. And Kale would be the one to end it. Because when the galaxy spoke of humans, it never dared finish the sentence. But Kale would. He had seen enough to know the truth. Silence was only the beginning. Kale had followed the whispers through ruins and archives, through silence and lies, through fear and memory. He had heard the survivor's tale. He had seen records of war. He had touched signals that still carried human voices through centuries of void. And at last, he understood why the galaxy stayed silent. But one question remained. Were humans truly gone? The galaxy said yes. The galaxy buried them in silence, erased their story, locked their memory away. Yet everywhere Kale went, he found fragments, sparks, signs that refused to die. Humans had been a flame that once set the stars burning. And Kale knew flames always left embers. So he began his final search. Not for whispers. Not for archives. But for proof. For the truth that silence could no longer bury. Kale's journey carried him to the farthest edge of known space, to regions where maps ended and explorers did not return. There, beyond the reach of trade routes and empires, he found the wreck of a forgotten fleet drifting in the dark. The ships were old, broken, silent. Yet when Kale's vessel drew near, his scanners picked something strange. A faint pulse of energy, deep inside one of the shattered hulls. He guided his ship closer and entered the wreck. The corridors were torn apart, filled with shadows and drifting dust. It was a tomb, a graveyard of metal. But the pulse was still there, calling him deeper. He followed it until he reached a sealed chamber at the heart of the ship. The doors resisted him, but Kale was patient. He worked for hours, cutting through metal, bypassing ancient locks. At last, the chamber opened, and Kale stepped inside. What he saw stole his breath. It was not just a chamber. It was a vault. And inside the vault stood a stasis pod. Its surface was cracked, its lights weak, but it was still alive. And within the glass, frozen in sleep, was a figure. A human. Kale stood frozen, his heart pounding. For years, he had chased whispers. For years, he had been told silence was the only truth. And now, here before him, was proof that the silence was a lie. Humans were not gone. At least one had survived. The figure inside the pod looked fragile. Pale skin. Thin frame. No claws, no armor, no monstrous strength. But even in sleep, Cale saw something in the human's face. A calmness. A quiet determination. The same fire he had seen in the survivor's memory. He touched the pod, and the faint light flickered. A screen came to life, showing words in old human script. Cale did not understand every symbol, but he understood enough. The words spoke of a mission. A mission to endure. The pod was not only a prison of sleep, but a promise. A promise that humans would return when the galaxy had forgotten. Cale's breath shook. He had found the truth. The silence was not only fear of memory. It was fear of this moment. Fear that one day, someone would find what he had found. Fear that the flame would rise again. He spent hours inside the vault, searching every corner. He found records etched into metal plates, written in languages half lost to time. They told of the last days of war, when humanity faced destruction. They spoke of choices made, of sacrifices given. They told of fleets that burned so others could escape. And they told of stasis pods hidden across the stars, scattered like seeds, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Humans had not vanished. They had planted themselves into the galaxy, hidden but alive. The silence was no longer a mystery. It was a wall built to keep this truth from spreading. If the galaxy knew, fear would rise again. Empires would tremble. Armies would prepare. And all would wait for the return of the species that had once made death itself hesitate. Cale sat in the vault, staring at the pod. He wondered if he should open it. His hands hovered over the controls more than once. But he did not. The galaxy was not ready. Perhaps even he was not ready. But he knew the silence was broken now. Because once the truth was seen, it could not be unseen. Cale left the wreck and returned to his ship, but the image of the human in the pod stayed with him. He traveled back toward the known worlds, his heart heavy with the secret he now carried. He thought of the survivor's words, that the galaxy feared their return. And now he understood why. Humans had not been erased. They had been waiting. On one world, he stood at a marketplace and watched the people move around him. Different species, different colors, different shapes. All living under the shadow of silence, never knowing what truth lay beyond the stars. He wondered what they would say if they knew. Would they fear? Would they hope? Would they rise as humans had risen, unbroken against the impossible? Cale felt the weight of choice pressing upon him. He had the power to speak, to tell the truth, to shatter the silence. But he also knew that once spoken, the truth could never be taken back. The galaxy would change forever. He remembered the words carved in stone in the chamber of Drosen: silence was safer than truth. But Cale had never sought safety. He had sought truth. And now he had it. He began to write. Not in secret archives, not in hidden codes, but in words plain and clear. He wrote of what he had found, of what the survivor had told him, of the signals, the archives, the voices, the pod. He wrote that humans had not been broken, that their spirit had not died, that silence had been a lie. He wrote the sentence the galaxy had never dared to finish. When the galaxy spoke of humans, it remembered that they always returned. The words spread slowly at first. Whispers, as they always had. But whispers became voices. Voices became shouts. Across stations, across colonies, across worlds, the silence cracked. Some feared. Some hoped. But none could ignore it. The galaxy trembled as the truth moved through it. Cale knew his journey was not over. The pod was still out there, hidden in the wreck, sleeping in silence. And if one pod survived, perhaps others did too. Somewhere, beyond the reach of empires, beyond the silence, humans might still wait. And if they awoke, the galaxy would no longer whisper. It would speak. Cale looked out at the stars one last time. The void stretched before him, endless and dark. But within that dark, he now knew, lived fire. And fire always returns. The silence had been broken. The truth had been spoken. And the galaxy would never be the same.